And then right before she walked out, she said something to me I never, ever forgot. She turned and looked at me and she says, and now keep in mind at the time I'm in my late 30s and I'm in pretty good health. She turned to me and she says, I have to say something. People who look like you don't lay in hospital beds like this. She goes, you need to take a really good look at your life about what's going on. And with that, she turned and she left. And that was probably the biggest kick in the shin I ever had in my life. I mean, but it was said in love, and it was said, it wasn't kind of like this, I was kind of expecting, oh, wow, you poor guy. No, she was like, look, you idiot, whatever you're doing, you need to stop because you're literally killing yourself.
Welcome to the RealPropPro podcast, where strategy, innovation, and wealth converge to redefine real estate investing.
Hello, and welcome to the RealPropPro podcast. I'm your host, Ian Dietler, Sacramento-based investor that focuses on fix and flips. I have started this podcast to have real conversations with the people who are actually doing the work and building lives of freedom through real estate. At RealPropPro, we train investors in all kinds of strategies, from fix and flips, short-term rentals, creative financing, tax deed and tax lien investing, and so much more. Whether you're new or scaling up, we've got tools and training to help you succeed. Check out RealPropPro.com. Today, I am joined by Mark Dolfini, an investor, business coach, and author of several books, including his latest, The Time Wealthy Advantage. Mark helps real estate investors not just make money, but design lives where their time is protected and their systems work for them. We'll talk about how he got started, how he coaches others, and the philosophy behind his books. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for the glowing warm up there. I appreciate it, Ian. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. We really appreciate all your knowledge and experience that you've, learned and lived throughout all of these years. So glad to have you on. Can't wait to talk about the book. I absolutely love the book. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But first, let's start from the beginning. Where did you grow up and what was life like for you growing up?
I grew up in a teeny tiny little town in upstate New York. And that it's kind of funny because when I say that I grew up on the top of a mountain, it was literally on the top of a mountain. And I'm like, that is not, that's not a clever metaphor. We lived on a road called Mountain Road. And literally we were at the peak. Like we were one of the few houses that was at the very peak of it. And we were on the on the side of it a little bit, so we got an amazing view growing up as kids, but it was not a lot of kids around to play with, so I had to get real creative with my imagination, and yeah, it was a good place to grow up as a kid for sure.
Nice. What was life like? Going through high school and stuff as a kid in a smaller town. What was that like for you?
Well, the town, it's kind of funny, we all hear the grandfather stories of, I had to walk uphill both ways and 3 feet of snow. That actually was me. That is really true. I had to walk uphill. It was a pretty steep driveway to get up, and usually in the snow, because it had snowed overnight, but my bus ride to school was about an hour. But by the time I got on the bus, which was, I don't even remember, somewhere around 6:30 if I remember right. And by the time we got to school, it was around 7:30 or so. So I was on the bus for a little. I was one of the first kids on the bus. And so needless to say, in high school, that kind of sucked because all my friends lived in civilization. They had the cool stuff like, cable television and things like that, where cable didn't even run where we lived just because we were so far in the middle of nowhere. But because we were on the edge of space, literally on the top of a mountain, we were able to pick up TV signals from states all around, all over the place. We could pick up the signals from Connecticut and Massachusetts and, just different areas. So it was kind of neat from that perspective. But, you know, um, when you definitely wanted to be more social as a kid in high school, it definitely sucked though, because you couldn't give directions. That was, again, pre GPS, pre cell phones. So trying to give directions for anybody to find our house was impossible. So we didn't have much company. We had to go visit them.
What did life look like for you after high school? Did you go to college or did you go into service? What was life like after high school?
So I pretty much graduated at the top 98th percentile of my class, which, if you do the math, that's the bottom 2%. So I literally graduated so there was like 360 students. I think I graduated 358th. So I was at the dead bottom of the class. I barely made it through, but I really didn't pay much attention in school. I was one of those smart kids who figured out how to do the bare minimum and absolutely nothing more. So the best choice I ever had, after that, was community college, and there was a decent community college nearby, um, but really that's not really where I stepped into any sort of um, limelight at all. It was really more about when I joined the Marine Corps, and that's really when life started to take off for me. Is because, for the first time, it wasn't about my charisma or anything else. It was, I mean, I had to perform. I had to perform in ways that I never really was expected to before. And it wasn't just physical; it was mental, and that was really good because when I went in the Marine Corps, and because the Marine Corps is so small and reactionary, we really don't have, I mean, at the time, the Marines were 300,000 total Marines, including the reserves. Right now, I think the numbers are at 200,000, so it's getting even smaller. But back then, we still didn't have. They're not going to waste talent. So when I went and sat down for the ASVAB, I got into the 93rd percentile, which was absolutely amazing because you know, because I referenced that against how poorly I did in school, but I actually did okay on the ASVAB. So they were like, okay, well, what job do you want? I'm like, what job do you have? And they're like, well, really don't have much. Well, let's put you in as open contract and we'll see where you land. So keep in mind, that could mean I could be an infantry guy or I could be a cook. But my recruiter assured me, and it did make sense, and it actually did work out this way that if you with those kind of scores, you go in open contract, you can pretty much they're going to put you in something decent, and they did. They made me a navigator on C-130s, so I was a celestial navigator. And again, this is the days when GPS really wasn't all that common. I mean, they had like Garmin's were not very common yet, but they certainly didn't have them in the airplanes. So we were shooting celestial lines of position using a sextant, to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, things like that. So it was a great job. It really was a wonderful job. Did that for 4 years, and after a while, I was like, yeah, you know what, I do want to get out. I want to take my education seriously this time. So while I was in the Marine Corps, I decided I was going to go to Purdue, and that's what I did. I had applied to Purdue. I had to take my SATs because I didn't even take those when I was in high school. So imagine being 3 years out of high school and sitting down for your SATs, especially with the stellar grades that I had. So I had to relearn basically everything I was supposed to learn in high school. I had to learn in about 3 months. And I was like, man, this would have been a lot easier if I'd just done this the first time around. But, I tend to do things the hard way. And not proud of that, but it definitely slowed me down. But I got good enough grades to get into, or good enough score on my SAT to get into accepted at Purdue, and that's where I went to school.
Nice. What kind of studies did you do at Purdue?
I originally had gotten accepted to their hotel management program, their hospitality program, and that's what the direction I thought I wanted to go in. But the more I got into that program, I realized that program really wasn't as challenging as I was hoping for. So I actually changed into accounting, and I went to the School of Management. So I got out of the hospitality and tourism school and went into the School of Management. At the time, it was called Craner, and it was good. I'm really glad I went into that program. I worked in the field of accounting after a while after I got out of school. But I didn't really, and I really like the background in accounting because it's certainly helped me out in my own business and certainly helped me with the people who I coach and consult for now. But it's definitely not a job that I was well suited for. I'm just way too social. Like, get back to your desk.
Yeah, so it sounds like you didn't become a CPA, right? That wasn't really the goal at that point, was it?
No, I chose to go the corporate route, and that's generally the two routes you can go, either the public route where this, you become a CPA, or you go the corporate route. And I went the corporate route. So I worked for Marriott for a few years, and that was a wonderful company to work for. I really enjoyed my time at the Marriott, but I recognized that all during that time and while I was in college, I had started buying some rental properties. So I had figured out how the banks underwrote their loans. And I was like, okay, going to apply for the loan. They're like, well, I was like, well, what kind of financials do you have? I'm like, well, what kind of financials do you need? That sort of thing. Ask me no questions, I'll tell you no lies. But yeah, I figured that out, and then I was able to start getting into rental properties, and I had done fairly well. I had about a $500,000 worth of real estate acquired by the time I graduated from Purdue. So most of it with no money down. None of them were cash flowing hardly at all, and really it was just a job I'd created for myself. But it was a way of getting into the mix and figuring out how to do it. So
Very nice. That was going to lead me into my next question, which was what first exposed you to real estate? How did you get that first deal and like what made you interested in that first deal?
so technically, my first real estate that I purchased was in '93. No, it was later than that, '95, because I got in the Marine Corps in '93. So I purchased my first piece of real estate in '95, which was about 50 acres of bare land in Arizona. And at the time, it was selling for like $250 an acre. So super, super cheap. And, and the taxes were ungodly low. So I just thought, well, heck, I'll just buy this. And I did. I bought it and sat on it for a while. And that was my first piece of real estate, but I didn't buy anything cash flowing until I got out of the Marine Corps, and it was my first year at Purdue. And I'd always been interested in real estate just because of initially because of the money of it, right? That's what attracts a lot of people. But then I got what kept me in it was the challenges from all different aspects. You've got the obviously finding decent deals and negotiating the deals, and then the financing side of it is a whole other deal. You can have a great deal that gets ruined by horrible financing. And good financing can make an otherwise horrible deal okay, right? Not great. Seldom will it make it great, but usually if you get decent financing, you can make a terrible deal, palatable. And then you got the human component. You got the human side of the business, which is the management of the human beings and doing that well, and being a nice enough person, but also not so nice where you get backed over and run over. So I really enjoyed all of the components that side of the business really commanded, and it was a lot of fun. And I got pretty darn good at it.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you get to kind of use both sides of your brain on this. You get to use your analytical side and a little bit of creative side to make these deals happen or find ways to make deals happen. It's not just, oh no, I can't do this deal. It's more of a how can I do this deal type of thing. So it sounds like you got to get a little bit creative and still use some of that accounting stuff to start to build a portfolio. So what did it look like kind of building the portfolio? Did it go smoothly or like was it not so smooth? Like how did the scaling side of things go for you?
Well, it went quickly, but it shouldn't have, because I was buying a lot of properties I shouldn't have purchased. But again, at the time, I didn't know what I didn't know, and a lot of times I could get into deals with no money down. But the problem was the cash flow was so poor. There was deals I never should have agreed to. And I would think, oh, if I'm making, at the time, 100 or $200 over the PITI, the mortgage payment, I was doing great. And the problem was I didn't budget for all those jobs I was creating for myself. I created a management job. I created a leasing job. I created a mowing job at times. I created all these little jobs for myself. And the problem is that for each line item that you don't budget for becomes a job you create for yourself. So if you don't budget for someone else to do the management, you have now and forever baked in the cake a management job for yourself, or a leasing job for yourself, or a maintenance job, or a snow shoveling job, or whatever it is. So that's the problem. Not too much snow shoveling going on now, but it's about 100 degrees outside right now in Indiana. But the thing is, like, all of that stuff, all these different individual little jobs and turns, where you're painting and cleaning and all this stuff, if you don't budget for that in your pro forma and your projections, those are jobs that you create for yourself. Because where else is the money going to come from? It's either going to come from your labor, or you're going to have to go get a job and pay someone else so they can work for you, and that kind of defeats the purpose. So I was growing probably at that point in time 1 to 2 units a year, and not all of them were turds, but a lot of them were. And looking back, I probably shouldn't have bought a good chunk of them, most of them. And I never really looked at deleveraging the way that I should have deleveraged. So that's a whole other conversation. But the I mean the I know a lot of people who listen to shows like yours, and a lot of people get into real estate. They're so concerned with scale before they even have a business. And you the only way that you can really scale is if you have enough margin, and not just profit margin percentage, but enough margin in dollars. So and if you don't, you got to have enough. You have to have cash to offset that risk. And in that case, I didn't have either. I didn't have margin, and I certainly didn't have cash sitting in the bank. So that became a big problem.
In your book, you kind of talk about some of the rough times that you went through. I know there was, I know there's a point where you're just working, and just driving yourself into the ground. Can you kind of talk about how you got into that position, and then what was the result of just working yourself almost to death?
Yeah, and that's not just for your listeners, that's not just a a play on words. I actually almost did die. I almost worked myself to death. I so at this point in time, I had purchased again through a variety of creative means and wheeling and dealing. I had created I had 92 rental units altogether. And some of them were small apartment buildings or duplexes, but most of them were single family homes.
Wow,
And
that's a lot of
my
roofs.
cash, yeah. Well, they were all in one town. The thing was,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it was a typical 80-20 problem, and it's it wouldn't have mattered, even if I had one, even if they were all, it was one apartment building, it wouldn't have mattered, because it was just it wasn't the driving around that was the problem. It was everything else. I mean, the driving around was ancillary to all the other dumb things that I did, but certainly exasperated the problem. But most of my I mean, the town I live in is pretty small. I mean, it's maybe 10-20 minutes across town at the most. So it really is not that big of a deal. But um yeah, when I had the 92 rental units, and I was bringing in about $65,000 a month in rental revenues. So by most people's measures of success, I was crushing it, and I had the big house, and I had the fancy car, and all of it was on borrowed money and borrowed time. So when things started to go sideways in 2008, it's kind of funny because people talk about the Great Recession in 2009. I'm like, man, it had been bad for a while before
Mhm.
people really started to go, oh, wow, it's really starting to get bad out there. I'm like, where have you been? Like, like it's like someone says, "Oh, is it going to rain outside?" Meanwhile, you've been walking 5 miles in the rain. Like you got a fish in your shoe, and you're like, "What are you talking about?" Like it's been pouring. So anyway, it was horrible for a while, and by the time I turned around and I started defaulting on a lot of mortgages, it was I was probably 4 or 5 months into when people started saying it was really, really bad. I was about 4 or 5 months already, into that. And so I was working as many hours as I possibly could, and many people were getting laid off. And, I had people that were in units that hadn't paid rent in months. And I was like, well, I'd rather you just stay there and not have the vacancy, but it didn't matter. I had vacancies, but I couldn't afford to pay anybody because of the way I had set up this business. It was all driven by me. So, I was literally working, and not being coy here, but I was probably working about 18 to 19 hours a day. Um, and I would
Wow.
catch cat naps like in the parking lot of Lowe's, or, at red lights, whatever I could. Sometimes in the bank drive-through. But all kidding aside, I was exhausted, and I ended up getting a cold. And it's rare that I actually did the right thing. I actually went to the doctor, and they said, "Yep, take this medicine, go get some rest." So I took the medicine, and I went right back to work. And about 4 days later, um, I got down to a point where the only way that I could actually breathe was if I leaned over the front of a chair or the back of a chair and put pressure against my chest. Something just wasn't right. So, um, went back to the hospital, and and this hospital was just newly built. So they brought me into this hospital, and they brought me into this triage room, and they said, "Oh, well, it sounds like you need a breathing treatment of some sort. We'll get that ordered, and we'll have someone come down." Well, they shut that door, and they left me alone. And I'm sitting there, and as I'm laying down, I'm not able to get up. Like, I'm getting less and less oxygen, and I couldn't really get up, because I was so deprived from oxygen. And then all of a sudden, my vision at the edges was starting to get real fuzzy, and it started to descend into this tiny pinpoint of light, just like way off in the distance. And I remember thinking, "Holy crap, this is how I'm gonna die." And it was amazing because I wasn't freaked out. I was actually, well, this is what they call hypoxia. I got euphoric. I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, I was surprisingly calm, even though I'm kind of mouthing for air like a fish out of water. And I resigned myself to my fate. I thought, "Okay, this is it. This is how I'm gonna go," and closed my eyes for what I thought would be the last time. And a few minutes later, I was kind of brought around to someone fitting a mask over my face, and you know, um, getting me the oxygen that I needed, in the breathing treatment that I needed. Um, but that was it. So they admitted me to the hospital, and I was feeling much, much better because I got the treatment that I needed. And I referenced this section in the book when the hospitalist came in and said to me, introduced herself as a hospitalist, and she had put her hands in the front of her lab coat with her stethoscope around her neck, and explained to me that you're exactly where you need to be. And that, she must have sensed my eagerness to get out of the hospital. And she said, "If you think you're going to check yourself out of this hospital and and not stay here for the next few days," she's like, she goes, "if you make it back," she goes, "you're going to be in a much, much worse place. So this is exactly where you need to be for the next few days." So really couldn't do much except nod, because she knew clearly what my intention was. And then she kind of explained a few other things. And then right before she walked out, she said something to me I never, ever forgot. And she turned and looked at me, and she says, and now keep in mind, at the time I'm in my late 30s, and I'm in pretty good health. Other than the fact that other than the pneumonia thing that I actually had going on. But she turned to me and she says, "I have to say something. People who look like you don't lay in hospital beds like this." She goes, "You need to take a really good look at your life about what's going on." And with that, she turned and she left. And that was probably the biggest kick in the shin I ever had in my life. But it was said in love, and it was said, it wasn't kind of like this, I was kind of expecting, "Oh, wow, you poor guy." No, she was like, look, you idiot, whatever you're doing, you need to stop because you're literally killing yourself. And for the next 3 days, that's really what had happened. I just had this moment of resignation where I was like, okay, something has to be different. Something has to change. I can't keep doing what I'm doing because this is a nightmare. And that's really where things started to change for me, where, things were going to happen regardless of what it was. And I couldn't stop that train at that point in time. I was going to lose a bunch of properties. And over the next few, roughly the next year, probably the next 8 months or so, I had lost out of my $6.5 million portfolio, I lost about $5 million in about 8 months. So I still had about $1.5 million to maintain, but yeah, everything that I had built the previous 10 years was just smoking wreckage at that point.
Wow, thank you for sharing that story. Reading it in your book was very touching, and I hope it helps people realize that we can't just work ourselves to death. We can't just, keep grinding, keep grinding. I mean, we still have to take care of ourselves. We still need to take care of our mental health and our bodies and, take rest when we need. So I hope that message resonates with our listeners here today. So where did you go from there? I mean, like, you had a global financial meltdown. You had your body just about shutting down, portfolio shut down. Kind of, what was the rebuild process? What did life look like after all of that stuff happened?
Um, well, I was at the bottom of this hole, and the thing I had to do was just start filling it in, and that's exactly what I did. So, I got on the phone with all my creditors and figured out who was going to work with me and who wasn't going to work with me. Um, Some were absolutely amazing. I mean, the folks at American Express, I could never ever repay them for the what they had done. I know they're a massive company, but I absolutely anytime I can give props to them, they did it the right way. They really did. They recognized the what it was that was going down. They offered me payments, but the really interesting thing was they said, look, we're not going to offer you a settlement, but if you pay us in full, we're going to shut the interest off. You pay us in full, we're going to give you a card back. And I was like, what? Why would you do that? And I even asked them, I said, why would you give me a card back? Like, I have literally got no reason why you should give me a card. They said, if you pay us back, that tells us that you're serious about your credit with us. That's why we're not going to accept a settlement. I was like, okay. And I only owed them like, I don't even know, it was like 1,000 or 1,500 bucks. It may as well have been $1 million. I didn't have it, right? So I paid them like $20 a month. I mean, I had nothing. So they just said, make some payments, sometimes it was 10, sometimes 20, sometimes it was 50, but whatever I had at the end of a month, I could pay them. And established a really good payment rapport with them. Again, it got down to 800 and 700 and 400 and 200. And eventually I was able to actually stroke that one, final check for like $175 and get them paid in full. And they said, okay, here's your card. And I never forgot that. Never forgot that. And I had been a customer of theirs forever. So, I just, and that's how you do it. And keep in mind, this is a time when the government was not stepping in to help small business owners. The government was stepping in with TARP loans to help all the major auto manufacturers and all the major banks. And they weren't helping little guys like us, right? That's why, and during COVID-19, when, you know, I mean, the government did it the right way that time. Trump, he gets it. He understood what it was like being the small business owner. Granted, I think it was a little bit over excess. I knew the inflation thing was definitely going to happen, but it had to, and they helped the right people. So I'm not necessarily in his camp, but he definitely did the right thing. So anyway, rebuilding this, I got in touch with my creditors and just got whatever terms I could. Those who didn't work with me or didn't want to work with me or couldn't work with me because they have bank examiners to answer to. So they may have had their hands tied. So if they said, nope, we can't work with you, the only workout is you pay us in full and we won't foreclose. like, okay, well, that's not any sort of deal. Like that's a terrible workout plan. But I think I need to describe to you what a workout plan actually looks like. But they couldn't work with me, so I just kind of siphoned as much rent as I could off those properties until they fully foreclosed, and played the hand I was dealt. And so everybody who got in line, they got paid. Those, and then of course the deficiency judgments come in after the fact, after they foreclose and they sell the property for less than what it's owed. So now I owed another $500,000 in deficiency judgments, or however much that was. So I got them paid off. Um, but little just started digging and filling it back in shovelful by shovelful. Worked my tail off, but I had boundaries. I took Sundays off. And I started deleveraging my cash flow by bringing in other sources of revenue, like getting my broker's license so I could do property management in the state of Indiana, and different things so I could deleverage my cash flow. But it was a long, long, long grind. And had I declared bankruptcy, it might have gone a little bit faster for me, but I was just opposed to that. I knew I could get out of it, and I was going to get out of it without declaring bankruptcy, and I'm glad I did.
Nice. And another book of yours I was reading to kind of talks about how to set up systems for rental companies. Um, is that when you started to kind of set up systems to be able to get out of those jobs?
Yeah, because I knew at that point in time that my leverage was whatever it was. And now that the banks showed their cards in terms of what, who was going to work with me and who wasn't, um, I just said, okay, now I know what I'm working with. And there was a period of time that it allowed me to buy whatever I needed to buy, like property management software and, a decent website and all the different things, because those, there were so many people who talk about processes. And at the time, I was really into Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth, which really talks about this, creating like a franchise model. Whether you plan to franchise or not, it's about making it systematic so it could be replicated. Even if you don't have any interest in replicating or franchising, but that model works because it's so consistent. And consistency really needs to be your product more than any other thing. So when you're shooting for consistency, one of the things I feel like I think Michael Gerber got it a little bit backwards. And again, I'm not here to, say he was wrong, but there's no point in setting up a system or a process rather without having the infrastructure. You have to have the infrastructure. So in the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0, I wrote about the VIP method, vision, infrastructure, process, because without the vision of where you want to go and then the infrastructure to be in alignment with that vision for the future, that infrastructure is what your processes are going to run on. So if you have all these processes, people talk about systems and processes, you have to have the infrastructure that process is going to run on. Otherwise, you're bringing people into an inefficient organization. And when you hire people and you bring people into an inefficient organization, it magnifies the inefficiencies. However, when you have an efficient organization, because you have good infrastructure, because you have already delineated processes, but when you have good infrastructure and you hire people in, now you are bringing people into an efficient organization, and that will magnify the efficiencies.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. Really appreciate you kind of teaching the listeners just a little sample of, what's possible and what to look for and what to learn from. I'd like to shift gears and talk about your latest book, The Time Wealthy Advantage. We got it here. Got personal signed copy. Thank you very much for this. Appreciate it. Just
Thank you.
absolutely could not stop reading this great book. I recommend it to everybody. Can you kind of talk about what some of the core messages are in the book? I know there's a Viper method and a couple of things about, time blocking and stuff like that. Can you kind of talk about what's the main stuff in your new book?
Yeah, so the original book, because they're similar titles and I don't want to get people confused. So the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0 is specifically for rental property investors. And it's really about the management of them. So it's really not about buying or, you know, doing anything like that, but it is about managing them correctly. the Time Wealthy Advantage, which is the one that I just wrote, that is really more for the business owner, operator, entrepreneur, people who are in businesses for themselves. Could be real estate, but maybe not, because I certainly, as a strategist, I work for a lot of different business owners, and they tend to be in the service industry, but not always. But I know many contractors and so forth. But the Time Wealthy Advantage, when I talk about time wealth, I know, or when you write a book that's around time in the title, it's time wealthy or time, whatever it is. People often confuse me for a time management expert, and you can't manage time, and you really shouldn't even try. It's not like you can get 20 units of time in a jar and bury it in your backyard and use that 20 units of time later on, right? It just doesn't work that way. So you really can't manage your time, but you can manage yourself. You can manage your energy. And, so really it's about managing you and your best energy during the time that we're allotted. So that's really what this is about. And the whole premise of being time wealthy is being able to control your calendar to do what you want, when you want, for as long as you want to do it. And of course, that does take a component of financial wealth as well. But being time wealthy is a lot nicer when you do have some financial wealth. But it's critical when you don't have to be the one that has to do all the rowing in your boat to get to where you want to go. So it really is about setting up systems, using the VIP method that I wrote about in the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0 is expanded into the Viper method, which is the Time Wealthy Advantage, which it's still vision, infrastructure, and process, except for the entrepreneur, I put on the E and the R, which is execution and reporting. And the reason for those two additions is because it really, I think from the aspect of a business owner, that tends to be where a lot of things do fall apart, whether you're in real estate or otherwise. But, as I've evolved the Viper method or into the Viper method, the execution piece, that's when look, you built this battleship, you built this warship. Now you want to take it out of the harbor. You have to actually go do something. Part of that process is not just the day-to-day stuff that you do, in the process, but it's the strategic planning, right? And it's the people that you need in the strategic plan. It's the purpose of the strategic plan. Where are you going? Are you trying to get market share? Are you trying to get more customers? Are you, whatever it is, right? And then of course there's the promotion piece, right? So that people, purpose, and promotion is really what encompasses the strategic plan. And that's why E is so important, the execution, because most people, and especially for business owners, they're just, that's where it falls apart. You can have these best, amazing plans, but they fall apart in execution. So you have to have an execution piece, and you really need to know and delineate what things you're going to do every single day that are going to be your needle movers towards making sure that you're getting closer and closer to your strategic plan. So, and then at the R, at the end of the Viper method, is the reporting piece. And that's where you track your numbers, you track your metrics, and you're tracking your lead metrics, which are your activities, and you're tracking your lag metrics, what are the results of those activities. So if you're not anywhere you need to be, it's actually quite simple. You just need to look at your inputs, and you just need to look at your execution. You just need to look at your activities and adjust from there.
Yeah, I'm so glad you added those to that, because I also agree with you in that execution is typically where a lot of people fall off. Can you maybe theorize or maybe elaborate on why you think a lot of people fall off on that execution stage? Is it fear, or is it not knowing what to do? What would you say it is?
How long do we have? There's a ton of reasons, right? There's many reasons. A lot of it is fear. You were right on that, and some of it is imposter syndrome. They feel like they're actually not worthy of success, even though they say that they want it, and they're doing all these things, but realistically they're not working on their mindset. They're not working on the interior part, which is really they're gonna find ways to sabotage themselves. So you got all this fear and self-sabotaging behavior going on. Many business owners tend to be ADHD prone, which you know, I get it, I understand, but as a result, they have this shiny object syndrome where they're really they never met an idea they didn't love. until the next idea, right? And they, every time they go in the shower, they come out with 3 more business ideas, right? And I get that. I understand it, but they never stop long enough to get traction in any one direction. And as a result, you just kind of vibrate in place. You're kind of like a molecule, just, vibrating in place, never really getting anywhere. And that's a shame, because when you really can get momentum and going in one direction and stay in that one direction rather than, and I'm not talking about pivoting. I'm not talking about, like a linebacker, or a fullback, right? He takes the ball, he doesn't go straight into the end zone. He would love to, but no, he has to zigzag, right? He has to go left and right, but he's always going, north south. He's not running left and right too much, because he knows the end of the field is the goal. So that's where he's trying to get to. And that's where I feel like a lot of business owners lose sight of that, because they're not clear on their vision, or they're doing things that they're not well suited for. I read, I read this book. It's actually sitting on my desk. I just finished it a little bit ago, yesterday. But it's a book called The Four Agreements. And a colleague of ours, Walter Amorello, he's been telling me about this book for a while. And if you've not read The Four Agreements, I'm not going to spoil it, but the fourth agreement is to always do your best. And this one really hit me really hard. He's like, it's very easy to always do your best when you enjoy what it is that you do. And I was like, holy crap, man. Like there's times where I'm not doing my best because I don't enjoy the activity that I'm doing. And it's really hard for anyone to do their best over a long period of time when they're just doing it for money, or when they're just doing it for, for some magical, hey, I want $10 million in the bank, or $30 million, or 50 rental units, or whatever the thing is that doesn't have anything to do with what they are really good at. And they say that they love real estate and they love this. I'm like, really? Like, you don't love anything else, right? Like I love the challenge of it too, but I also love hanging out with our 2-year-old right now, who, when we say, hey, it's time to go to bed, all she does is, she blows raspberries at us and she runs away, which is hilarious, right? But it's so fun because we just really enjoy that time with raising her. We have a 19-year-old, we have a 17-year-old, and, we have this 2-year-old daughter. And it's so fun being a parent now. I'm in my early 50s, and I just really, really enjoy that. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I was constantly obsessed about the next deal or the next thing. And this isn't about playing small, but it's about being able to pull other things into neutral and be intentional and be where I'm at, and not 1,000 miles away when I'm supposed to be sitting and relaxing and doing those things. So you asked a really good question. Why does it fall apart in execution? I think it's a lot of reasons. And most of it is around mindset. Most of it around what is going on in the interior of our heads. And that's the piece of real estate that most people forget to work on.
Very good point. I'd also like to talk about another part of the book that really, I mean, almost the whole book really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff. But one thing that I'd like to talk about a little bit more is the whole idea of a personal vision versus a business vision, because I've always mixed those two together. And after reading your book and seeing that you also have some supplemental material, maybe you can talk about that. But yeah, I just always had the vision together, right? Like you go to work, you get to travel, and all that stuff is all in one. But you like to talk about it's how important it is to delineate those two and have one personal vision and one business vision. Can you talk about that and how your supplemental books will help people write it down and get it clear
Yeah.
in their head?
Yeah. So I'll come back to the guides here in a second, but the personal vision and the business vision, I had to get, like, in the early days, it was all I had was a business vision. And when I started talking to more and more real estate investors and business owners, they didn't have a personal vision. They were like, yeah, let me make 50 or 100 grand a month, and then I'll worry about this personal vision thing. And meanwhile, their life is passing them by, and all these life events are happening, and they're not able to do it because they're chasing this business vision that they have. So it's just really interesting that when, and that's exactly what I had back in 2008, 2009, is I had this business vision, and where did it get me? It landed me in the hospital. I missed out on major life events. I had a really, really close friend who passed away, and there was no way in the world I could get away long enough to go to his darn funeral. And like, I never forgot that. And I, so all of these life events were happening, and meanwhile, I'm just toiling on and on and on. And, I had a relationship that was circling the bowl at that point in time. And so that kind of went away, and all these different things. And so when I got really clear about what I wanted in my personal vision, and I will tell you, it was really a lot harder than I had anticipated, because I had such a hit to my self-worth and my own internal head trash. It's kind of funny. I tell people this story that, I had my hand, like, I was sat down to write a personal vision in terms of what I wanted my life to look like, and relationships, and, on all these things. And my hand trembled at the thought of writing something down. And I was like, what is going on with me? And I remembered the only way I was able to actually write it down. So in my apartment, I had a small apartment, and I was sitting at a whiteboard, and I shut the door, and I had an eraser next to the whiteboard as I'm writing it. So that way, in case someone came in and shot me in the head, I could at least like wipe it down. Like I wasn't, oh, I was just kidding. Didn't really want that, right? It's the only way I could really do that. And I was like, man, what is going on in my head? And it wasn't until years later I discovered all this limiting beliefs that I was carrying around with me, and thinking that I was just going to power through it. But I really was just, I was running uphill on a pile of ball bearings. It just wasn't going to work. So it wasn't until I did that inner work and really started to figure out how to reprogram that, and how to recondition my mind around my approach to money, around my approach to time. I mentioned earlier about about people who have ADHD tend to flock to entrepreneurship. And it's kind of funny, because when I started researching that, I realized that there is the watch of the ADHD person. There's two settings. There's now, and there's not now. So if you came in and said, hey, Mark, we need to leave in 5 minutes, I interpret that as, great, we don't have to leave now. So I'm going to get 17 more things done before we have to leave in 5 minutes. Of course, in 5 minutes time, that means that's when I get up and get my shoes on, and, oh, wait, I got to get that thing. And now we're 10 minutes late for leaving, even though you told me 5 minutes ago, hey, we're leaving in 5 minutes, right? So that's that relationship with time that happens. And, even that has gotten better once I've learned how to recondition this, wonderfully broken machine that I have inside my head. So, that whole concept about creating the personal vision first, and then in this particular case, back in 2009, 2010, when I was rebuilding, I was creating a business vision that was in alignment with my personal vision. So I'm not just saying that everything was in direct linear path. Life is very seldom that convenient. But, when you have a business vision, or when you have a business vision and you haven't really thought of a personal vision, you end up creating a life that exists to serve the business. And again, when you have that business vision and no personal vision, your business vision becomes your personal vision, because you have nothing else to focus on. So this is about, what do you want your marriage to look like? What do you want your relationship with your kids to look like? What do you want your relationship with your friends to look like? What do you want your faith to look like? What kind of things do you want, right? Like, it's cool to have cool stuff, but what kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be known as a philanthropist? Do you want to be known as someone who is funny, quick with a joke? Like, whatever it is, what kind of person you want to be, and what kind of things do you want to do? So it's not always about the things that you want to have. And then using a calendar to define what that personal vision would be. So it really is a passion of mine to make sure that people are focusing on the right things, focusing on their personal vision, and everything that they create is in support of that main circuit breaker. Everything that they build, from their business vision down to their infrastructure, their process, their execution, reporting, everything supports that personal vision.
I love that. Can you, I haven't had a chance to get my hands on your guides yet. I can't wait for them to come in the mail. I know you're still kind of waiting on a couple to come out. Can you
Yeah.
kind of maybe give us a sneak peek of what to expect? Is there one geared towards the vision? I believe there was.
So in the time wealthy advantage, there's a support website which has the personal vision roadmap, and it kind of walks people through that whole thing. So if you get the book, you don't necessarily need the guides for the personal vision. However, the guides are really important in a bunch of other ways. So in the book, I talked about the 4 core functions of business, which are lead generation, sales, operations, and accounting. 4 core functions: lead gen, sales, operations, accounting. And so one of those things, which actually does support kind of what you're talking about in terms of your personal vision, it's actually the strategic one sheet. It's actually the supplement number 4 out of all 4 of them. Well, I'll tell your listeners how they can get the book and all 4. Please don't go and buy them on Amazon. They're way more expensive, and I don't have control. And you wouldn't even. I'd be able to sign them actually if you were able to buy them through my website. But we'll give you the link for your listeners here. But the really cool thing though about the 4 guides is there is one on lead generation, and it's certain aspects of lead generation that I really couldn't write about in the book because the book was already almost 300 pages. So I pulled different elements out of that and for the lead generation, but then I did something a little bit different with sales, and there's certain checklist items in there. There's certain things in there that'll help you with mindset that you can carry around that guide when you are going into a selling conversation. And walk you through sometimes just when you have a bad sale, when you get your nose bloodied, that happens from time to time. But also from the accounting side, there's also the main guides in accounting where there's just certain things that you just need to know. And as a business owner, a lot of times we're thinking, well, shoot, like, you hear a phrase like EBITDA, and you're like, well, what's EBITDA? Right? Well, it's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Well, you're like, great. What is EBITDA? Right? Well, it's a financial measure, right? But again, I don't want to make you into an accountant. I just want to make you someone who is fluent and understanding enough. So when someone says, "Oh, let's take a look at your balance sheet," you know what a balance sheet is and what it represents and what it looks like and what it should look like, right? When you have an income statement or P&L or profit and loss, yes, all 3 of those things are exactly the same thing. An income statement and a P&L and a profit and loss are the same thing. It's just people using different verbiage for the same thing. I'm an accounting background purist, so I usually use the word income statement, but again, they're all the same thing. Should you care about what a general ledger is? Should you care what a statement of cash flows is? So all of these different things that people talk about when they're referencing, things like general ledger and all these different these different financial terms, that is what we talk about in the accounting guide. And it's just meant to be a guide, again, something that you can have and flip through and get convenient with. So these are all about 40 pages long. They're not super duper long. They're not meant to be super long. They're meant to be just guides to help you out through your day, and that things that you can carry around and work and have them with you as references, so you don't have to flip through a 300-page book to find these individual things.
All right. Well, sounds good. Can you tell the listeners where to get buy some copies of your book, and then we'll also put a link in the comments.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's strategicboardroom.com/RPP for your podcast here, but just go there, and there's a neat offer that I'm able to do this for your listeners, and I'm going to keep it up there as long as I can. But keep in mind, if I get too busy, I may have to change the offer. But for right now, it'll be the book offer, and that is you'll get a copy of the book plus a 60-minute session with me. It'll be a 60-minute one-to-one session solely with me. We can talk about whatever it is you want to talk about, and then if you want to buy the 4 guides in addition to that, you can get them for a special price there on the website as well. So again, way cheaper that way to get them than going through Amazon. And I can also sign the book and address it to you if you like.
Wow, thank you for that, and thank you for that offer for our listeners. We really appreciate it. and I highly encourage you guys to get in the book. It's a great read. Mark is a wonderful author. He's got great stories going throughout the whole thing, so it's not just all business and boring stuff. It's real life stuff. There's a real life story that blends through the entire book. So it's a good read. I highly recommend it. All right, let's shift gears here for a second. We're gonna try something brand new on this episode. Um, we're gonna do a lightning round that we call the bookshelf battle. I know Mark loves to read books. He's always reading new books all the time. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a lightning round where I'll throw out five different topics, and both Mark and I will each throw out one book that we recommend for that topic. So
Okay.
could be investing, mindset, anything that fits. So let's see how this goes. And if you have the book, grab it. I got a couple here I could grab too. So the first topic is, what is your best book just in real estate in general? While Mark finds that book, I'll go first. My number one just in general real estate book is got to be The Real Estate Millionaire Investor. That one's by Gary Keller. So now, Mark, which one?
Yep.
What's your number one real
So
estate?
so the so this is a book I read back in college. So if I look at the copyright on this book now, I don't know if you can see how yellow the pages are, but the pages are so yellow in this book. But it's very timeless. But the copyright on this book is 1997 by Prentice Hill. So yep, that's a salty one. So that
Yeah.
is that one is probably one of my better real estate books. I like that one.
Okay. Productivity or time management?
The one that's jumping out at me in terms of time management is probably The 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. Um, I didn't really love that book, but it's right here. Um, but it was the thing that I liked about it from time management perspective is that he just said basically when it comes to time management, forget all about it. And I remember him, saying that in the book, and it was, again, this one's quite salty too, and you can see how yellow some of these pages are. But he talked about that in terms of time management. But there was, I think that one was probably on time management. But if you're looking at productivity, um, mm, oh, I know, um, the 12-week year was actually quite good. That one, Brian Moran, the 12-week year. This actually is where I kind of came up with the idea. I called them something different, but in terms of lead metrics and lag metrics. But this is one that I actually referenced in the Time Wealthy Advantage, and this is a really, really good book in terms of productivity. I really like this one.
Nice. I'll also go with the 4 hour work week. That was one of my favorite. Tim Ferriss, I thought wrote it pretty well. I know a lot of people really like that one. Topic number three, mindset and personal growth.
Uh, Mindset and personal growth. Man, that's such a broad area. But one of the ones that I tell people about is Jack Canfield's The Success Principles. I really, really like this one. It kind of just lays it out into, I think there's 67 different principles that he has in here. This is probably one of my go-tos when people ask me for books on just personal development to start with. I really like Jack Canfield's The Success Principles. I think that's a really good place for most people to start.
Nice. I'm going to go with a classic. You can tell this is an old copy too. We got Think and Grow Rich here. I think that's a great book to change the way that your mind thinks, and it's kind of like put your thoughts out into the universe, and those wishes will come to you. So I'm really big on that type of stuff. I know it can be a little bit like metaphysical or like a little bit out there, but I think it's really good to at least have that vision and put it out there in the universe, because I do feel like the universe does give it back in some way. So I
Right.
like that for
Right.
mindset. I
Mhm.
added this topic on here because I know which one I like and most people like, but you have another one that you like, and I hope that you can share it with us. Book on negotiation. So a lot of
Negotiation.
people, yeah, a lot of people go with the one I'm going to go with. So I'm going to take it first, but I know that you have another one that you like. I like Never Split the Difference. Um,
That's by Chris
so
Voss.
that's Yeah, so that's one of my favorite on negotiation. But you have another one. What's the one that you like?
Yeah, so this one here, this is by an author, and his name is Dr. Mark Golston. Just listen. Yeah, so um, Chris Voss, I think, wrote a fine book. Um, I think this one's better. I think this one is far better in terms of actual practicality. And um, I don't know why. I mean, it was just the book was just marketed better. I read it and I was like, okay. And then I read this book, not knowing really what Just Listen was just about. Um, and he has got the same pedigree as Chris Voss. He was a FBI negotiator and negotiated all these different things. And he's much more clinical in terms of what to actually listen for when people are there in fight or flight. And he does such an amazing job of knowing when someone starts to break out of fight or flight and into their limbic brain, and you're not able to negotiate with them yet, but you're trying to get them to cognitive. When people are yelling at you, calm down, right? Like that's not going to work, right? It's saying, hey, what's got you so pissed? And they're like, man, you're right, I'm pissed. I'm so mad. You're like, oh, you're mad, right? Now they've labeled it. Now you're not out of the woods, but now you're getting them to because they put a label on it. Now you're using higher level of cognition, and you're getting them out of fight or flight, out of that reptilian brain into the limbic brain, and further the journey towards the cognitive thinking brain. So he does such a great job of actually referencing how to do that in this book. In my opinion, I think this is the one that you should read whenever it's just around human negotiation or human interaction. Fantastic read. Just Listen by Mark Golston.
Nice, thanks for that. Last one, entrepreneurship. I'm, I mean, we got E Myth, right? That's kind of to me usually the
Yeah,
number one. That's kind of one of the best one is the E Myth. There's a bunch of
yeah.
different other E Myths too. I have a couple of them up here.
Yeah,
Awaken the Entrepreneur Within, E Myth Mastery, E Myth Real Estate Investor Edition. There's all sorts of different editions. So there's a huge selection of E Myth books.
yeah. I think realistically, when you're looking, man, that's so good. One of the things that I feel like with entrepreneurs, one of the things that they try to do is they focus too much on the systems up front, when really what they need to be doing is focusing on lead generation. So that's why I'm struggling with this when I think about entrepreneurship. Like if you're literally just starting out, like you literally have an idea, um, I'm kind of leaning more towards Dan Kennedy's books. And Dan Kennedy wrote, I mean, he's written probably more than 24 books at this point, and he has this whole no BS series. No BS selling to the affluent, no BS direct sales. All these different these different books. I would say probably the no BS um, direct sales. I actually don't have that book here. I think I was using it to reference somewhere. But I think that's probably what I would recommend, just because it tees the people up. So it's actually called um, No BS Direct Sales. That's it. Direct Marketing. Yep, that's it. That's the one.
I just picked this
Fantastic
up
book.
yesterday. I haven't had a chance to
You
read it yet.
will. It is probably one of the best books he's ever written. And I've read almost everything he's got. And some of them were really, really good. Probably his no BS Selling to the Affluent is probably his best book. But I will tell you, his Audible on that book is different than that one. Selling to the Affluent. Yep. So there's that one. That one is different than the Audible, and because I've done both, and the book is way better than the Audible. It's not the same book. So anyway,
What
I
about
think
the time
those two
management?
books.
Have you had a chance to read that one?
It's on my stack of shame, but I have not read that one yet.
Hmm.
But he
Maybe
does it.
this is a good one for that topic for time management.
It could be. He wrote one that was no BS uh no it was no BS management or direct management, or what did he say? I can't. I'm having a brain cramp, but that was a green cover. But he did that one. Those are all sitting in my conference room. But because I do reference those books actually quite a bit, and that one was kind of like it was pretty brutal about time management there, about especially for entrepreneurs. So I have not read that specific one though. It's but it's in my stack of shame.
All right. Well, thank you for being a part of the first lightning round bookshelf
Yeah,
battle.
this was fun.
So on our show, we also give away a free book each week to our listeners. So some of the ones we have to give away for free. So we got a couple
There
there.
you go.
We're also giving away time wealthy advantages to one lucky winner.
Nice.
So to
Awesome.
enter, all you have to do is like the episode and leave a comment on which book you'd like to receive, and we'll ship it to your house for free. You must enter within 5 days of the air date. Mark Dolfini's message is simple but powerful. Real estate isn't just about money, it's about time. The goal of real estate isn't to build a business that traps you, it's to design one that gives you freedom. In the Time Wealthy Advantage, Mark shows how to shift focus from chasing income to creating systems that protect your time, your peace, and your priorities. If your business owns your calendar, you don't own your life. So step back, build with intention, and remember, financial freedom is hollow without time freedom. Live by design, not by default. Mark, thanks for joining us on the Real Prop Pro podcast. We really appreciate it.
It was you made it a lot of fun. It was really good to be here, and I hope your listeners got a lot of use and implement. Make sure you execute. And thanks so much for the time. I do appreciate it.
All right, everyone else, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.